Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policymaking for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast is Tim Cairns, who's former special advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson and a former head of policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hi, David.
And we also have our other regular, Michael McKernan. He was a former special advisor for the SDLP, worked in a number of departments from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. Hello, Tim. Greetings to you in Spain and in Portrush, respectively.
Brilliant. That just shows how amazingly committed we are that we will do this on our holidays. So
or Michael's just alerted burglars to come round and burgle our houses.
That's right. They probably leave stuff in mine. There isn't enough to take. Okay. On the podcast today, we are discussing the latest developments on the halting of the A5. We will be discussing reports on how the department was briefed on the climate implications for the A5 and what are the implications of this discovery? Then it's another summer where the future of the leader of the UUP is in doubt, as Mike Nesbitt signals he might stand down before the next election. And with a new MLA joining their ranks just this week, we'll be asking about the risks and the rewards in the months and years ahead for the UUP. All that and more coming up on this episode of Stormont Sources. You can watch the conversation on YouTube, search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. So make sure you head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel there for videos and updates. You can follow us on X, you can watch our clips on TikTok, Instagram, subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. Make sure you leave us a review on the podcast app. Many of you have done that. We're very, very, very appreciative of that. Just make sure it's a good review. If it's a bad one, don't bother, please. Also remember to send us a message. We did some readouts last week, so you can WhatsApp us on 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont, and also you can send us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. We do read all your messages, so please do keep them coming in. Okay, our first topic today is the latest developments on the A5. So the Irish News was reporting on Monday, John Manley, the political correspondent in that paper, was saying that Andrew Muir has revealed that officials met their counterparts in the Department of Infrastructure no fewer than 7 times to discuss the potential impact of the Climate Change Act legislation and the impact that that would have on plans to build the A5. So the High Court, if you remember, we talked about this back in June, ruled that the nearly £2 billion project could not go ahead because it failed to comply with Stormont's own climate change targets. Now, in correspondence that has been seen by the Irish News, the Minister, Andrew Muir, has revealed that between December 2023 and May of 2024, his officials met with DFI on 7 occasions to assist in the preparation of the response to the climate-related issues that were being raised by the Planning Appeals Commission, which was referring, of course, to some of those climate issues. Tim, okay, this is a bit more detailed than we had before. I mean, first of all, what did you make of that when you looked at the front page of the Irish News on Monday and this was that?
Well, it's not new. I mean, and certainly this is something that's happened before. We've seen. I mean, RHI mentioned that. We saw the Department of Agriculture at that time was going out and selling something that the Daddy was trying to close down and stop. I mean, we have difficulty with departments talking to each other, and I think that comes within this mandatory coalition. This is yet another in a long list of departments failing to take seriously what other departments are saying. It's not unique to Northern Ireland because we do see this happening in Westminster, and we do see this happening in other governments across the world as well. There is still that silo mentality, but we don't actually have any coordination in the centre. So in Westminster, if a department feels that another department's not listening to it, well, they go to the Cabinet Office and there's where problems are sorted out and things are brought together. We don't have that in Northern Ireland. In Scotland, I'm not so familiar with Scotland, but I assume the First Minister, that office is where problems where departments aren't communicating. I assume within the office of the First Minister, those are, that's where this is thrashed out. And because you're from the same party. And we have this problem continually in Northern Ireland because the minister runs their own department. They're from a different political party to the other, but in this case, it's Alliance coming to Sinn Féin. And so the minister can just downplay that, or if civil servants don't want to see this as seriously, or take the information as seriously as otherwise they should, they've got an out to downplay that, because we're not talking about party colleagues here. So Andrew Muir just can't come directly to his party colleague at a party meeting and say, hold on, like, my officials are saying your officials aren't taking this seriously enough. You maybe want to look at that. We're in a pitfall here if we don't do that. And we just don't have that coordination in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And I think we see that time and again where that leads to bad government.
Yeah, I mean, there is, interestingly, because there's been talk of a delivery unit being set up in the executive office. But again, as you were pointing out,
It won't work.
Yeah.
Won't work,
Yeah.
David.
Yeah. Peter Robinson tried at one point to be prime ministerial and to hold colleagues to account around the executive table.
You didn't like that, Michael, so you didn't.
Go ahead, Michael.
I
Tell us about that.
wasn't particularly fond of it, but in any event. So
what happened, Michael?
remember
Just before we get into that, just because because you brought up something there that was really, really interesting. So when Peter Robinson did start doing that, I mean, what was the protocol there? Did you just tell him to bog off, or did you have to do anything?
I remember, I don't know if Tim was in these roads, but I remember him absolutely excoriating Michael McKernan over some things he was doing in health, and he was really, thumping the table and telling McKernan what he thought of him. But in the end, McKernan just sat there. Danny Kennedy just sat there. They had their own mandate to be there. They weren't answerable to Peter, and they just took the flak. But it didn't divert them from what they were doing, because Peter ultimately didn't have the power. But he tried, and Tim is right. If you get two departments, two different ministers from different parties, then there's no obligation to cooperate any more than they want to. The only thing is that in this case, you can't. Both departments would want to see the project succeed, you would think. So whether it's a scoop for the Irish News, a scoop for John Manley, or whether Andrew Muir's just putting it out there, a little bit of politics to say, well, I'm not to blame. We tried. The blame rests with the Department of Infrastructure. Maybe that's what's going on. But it fits an overall pattern of executive projects that just go off the rails because they're poorly managed. And I always, as I say, tend to fall on the side of the politician as opposed to officialdom. There is a checklist of things. I suppose there's a difference between an experienced minister and an inexperienced minister. An experienced minister who's been round a few corners will line up the officials and say, right, tell me, where are the showstoppers? What can go wrong here? You've given me some assurances here on the equality aspect, or the environmental aspect, or the retail impact, or whatever it is in a planning decision. Now, where could we be JR'd? Where are we vulnerable, and what are we going to do to patch it up and fix it? An experienced minister will ask those questions. An experienced SPAD will ask those questions, and press officialdom to satisfy them fully before they press the button on the project, and that clearly hasn't happened here.
And Tim, you were saying there, because you were saying about the delivery unit. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Michelle O'Neill and Emma Pengelly announced they were going to set up a delivery unit. This is going to help kind of to tackle some of the challenges that you guys have actually just alluded to in the opening minutes, about basically kind of coordinating delivery and making sure that the executive does kind of get underway. Now, delivery units wouldn't be new to the Northern Ireland Executive. Of course, Tony Blair set up one in Downing Street as well, and Prime Ministers since have actually found that to be a valuable piece of infrastructure in the British government. But you don't think it'll work, Tim, in Northern Ireland? Why not?
Well, for what Michael's outlined, I think the best chance the Northern Ireland Executive had of establishing some sort of coordination at the centre was when Robinson and McGuinness were in charge, because even if you were from the SDLP or the Ulster Unionist Party, you still had a knowledge and respect that these guys probably were at the match and pretty high quality in their political delivery and their political operations. So with this disparate rainbow coalition of enforced people that have to work together, as we've seen that evolve, I think what we've seen is the quality has gone down. I think there's no question of that. The current First and Deputy First Minister are not of the quality of Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, and I think they would say that themselves. We're not saying anything where their ego is going to be bruised in that. I think both of them would recognise they're not in the same league as those two gentlemen. But even as we see, down the batting order of the executive, we don't see as many quality ministers now as what we did in the past, and I think that's really a problem for our politics here.
So are you saying we need to bring back Sammy Wilson, Tim? Is that what you're saying?
Well, look, you can say what you want about Sammy Wilson, but Sammy Wilson was a very good operator in his day. Was someone who's a very good finance minister. I think he was respected across the executive.
But
In terms of
he's maybe not your man to take on the issue of climate, though.
no, he's certainly not. He certainly wouldn't be the person who's pointing out the climate change problems in the A5. No, he would probably just be down with a bulldozer himself and concrete whatever the bird habitat and get the road built. But maybe that's what we need. So there's somebody to do that.
So the interesting thing is, Michael, okay, then, so if a delivery unit isn't going to work in this current context, right, and we've seen the A5 here, obviously departments are kind of talking to each other, but they don't really seem to be listening to each other. That seems to be one of the issues here. I mean, is this not a problem really kind of with the structure of how our government departments are kind of set up? Are kind of set up. Is there something that do we need a broader reform of how our government departments are structured? Because we forget, just because DAERA talked to a division within DFI, you can't necessarily guarantee that maybe the division within DFI spoke to other people in DFI, and that's true of other government departments that we've seen.
Yeah, but you're asking a big question here. The constitutional arrangements that we have mean that ministers are there on the strength of their own mandate for their own party, and they're not answerable in the way that they might be in Scotland or certainly in London to a Prime Minister in a Cabinet Office. So you can set up all the Cabinet Offices you want, equivalent to Northern Ireland, a delivery unit, but that delivery unit does not have power over individual departments other than the ones controlled by those at the centre, by the DUP and Sinn Féin. The non-DUP and Sinn Féin departments can tell them where to get off. Now, there's a bit of a moral imperative, I think, for departments. I mean, there is a programme for government, such as it is, and there is a moral imperative for departments that are non-Sinn Féin, non-DUP, to kind of muck in and try and help the executive achieve its overall objectives. But the current arrangements don't really allow for that. If ministers from non-DUP, non-Sinn Féin ministers don't want to cooperate, they don't have to. If you want to change that, then you're talking about a whole renegotiation of our devolved arrangements. Now, Mark Durkan, a long time ago, pointed out that the whole thing was unsatisfactory. But it was a way of getting everybody into the tent to some extent. And he talked about taking down the ugly scaffolding where you have these built-in vetoes and built-in oppositional situations. And we're just not mature enough. We haven't made enough progress to try something like that yet. So I don't think the delivery unit's going to go very far. Also, people have already been asking the Executive Office, tell us more about this delivery unit. How is it structured? Who's in charge of it? How many people are in it? What's its terms of reference? Blah, blah, blah. And silence from the Executive Office. So it might well just have been an interesting press release.
Yeah. And then, I mean, should we have any confidence then, Tim, that this project will ever finally see completion? I mean, will the redeveloped A5, I mean, will we ever see any bloody cars going up and down it? And will we ever see will we ever see a minister cutting a ribbon on opening the redeveloped road?
Without doubt, at some point in time, yes. But I think coming back to what Michael was saying there, I think there's something that we haven't mentioned yet, which is at the core of all of these problems, and that's the civil service. I mean, I think we've got a civil service that is still out of control. A new head of the civil service was brought in from outside of the civil service, supposedly to reform everything, to make it more professional, to move forward in a better way, and that simply hasn't happened. There's been absolutely no change in how the civil service works. It's still, Michael, I think is absolutely right. I doubt the Minister in Infrastructure ever heard of these environmental problems that Andrew Muir's department were telling DFI about on 7 or 8 occasions. I doubt that actually even raised the ministerial level, because the civil service probably didn't understand that it needed to be raised to ministerial level. Now, I might be wrong on that, and maybe documents will emerge that is what happened, and maybe the minister was to blame. Because I think we're very quick to blame ministers. We're very quick to blame people around the executive table. We're very quick to say, oh, they're just all squabbling and they can't get on. But I do think there is a fundamental problem within our civil service that they don't understand what needs to be elevated to the minister and what doesn't need to be elevated to the minister. Quite often, you would get absolute nonsense elevated to you, and you'd be reading submissions as a SPA, and you'd be going, why am I even reading this? Like, what on earth has this got to do? Like, this is a minor problem.
Can you give us just what was the most, that without going into any massive detail, but
Yeah.
what were the most 2 or 3 nonsensical things that you got across? You were reading it, going, what the hell?
Well, often it'd be pretty clear that there's a squabble going on internally between, grade 5X and grade 5Y, and they were trying to get their message to the minister first. And you'd be reading this thinking, like, why is this coming to the minister? Why is this being sent up? This it would be quite clear it was some internal squabble, and they were trying to get their spoken first. And often then you would discover that there were serious things that then weren't being elevated, and then at the very last minute, something that was hugely serious would suddenly be elevated to the minister, and you're thinking, why wasn't this brought to us 3, 4, 5 months ago? And I think there is a real problem within our civil service that they don't understand exactly how to work within this ministerial system that they have. They've had 25 years of it, and they're still operating as if it's direct rule. And I think that's a problem. The civil service has not had a mindset change between 1998 and now. They're still operating as if it's 1985. And until that's resolved, I think we're going to see a lot more of these problems. So yes, we can blame ministers, and yes, we can say, it's just that lot squabbling around the executive table. But I do think there's a real problem lying beneath the surface that has never been sorted out.
I think that's right, and I'm not sure what the solution is. We hear the criticism of ministers that our elected representatives have very little experience in actual government, in actual running things and managing big projects and so on. But equally, the civil service does not have much experience of serving devolved ministers properly. They have a direct rule mindset, and the direct rule mindset is simply you prioritise whatever the department and the officials think should be prioritised, and you mind the direct rule minister's rear end. As long as you don't embarrass them publicly, you just get on with it, and the civil service sets the priorities. And I found in numerous occasions where a minister wanted to do something that clashed with the pre-existing civil service priorities, and it was quite a tussle to get the thing changed. I remember being hauled, and not name names, I remember being hauled into the office of a very senior official one day in our department, and he came and said to me, listen, that's enough. The minister had said that he wanted to move a department closer to the minister's office to have a lot of interaction in a priority area. And I got hauled in and told, look, the minister's there to cut ribbons and make speeches. We run the department. We decide who's where. And we had a little tussle over that, of course, but all forgiven, of course, now.
I bet, Michael. Jeepers. Yeah, no, I mean, but to be fair, though, to the civil service, I know we've given a bit of a kicking. I mean, the executive has been down 40% of the time since 1999, so, you can't really... But, I mean, they haven't shifted... Fair enough, they may not have shifted out of the mindset, but that's because the thing hasn't been there for 40% of the time.
Yeah.
And in fairness, the civil service is absolutely right. The equally on the other side of things, politicians haven't dragged them out of that direct rule mindset. But I don't think there's ever been a serious attempt at the centre of the First and Deputy First Minister to do that. I think Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness would have liked to have seen that. And I think if Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness were in office today, I think you would see that the civil service would have been dragged a lot more kicking and screaming over the last 4 or 5 years into that new world. But yes, no, you're absolutely right, David. I mean, if politicians keep collapsing the thing, what incentive is there for the civil servants to change?
And there are many good individual civil servants and who are well motivated and do get it that it's the minister's priorities they're supposed to deliver on.
And one person, I know there was talk when Jane Brady came into him, as you're referring to, because she came in as an outsider. But one person can't do that by themselves, though. They needs to be they need ministerial backing from the executive, number one, and then they need kind of buy-in from the different departments. So look, but we'll wait and see.
But it just doesn't seem to be that there's any effort has been made even now. I might be wrong in that, but obviously we're observing from outside, so we can't see. But it does feel to me there hasn't been a lot of effort to make. And here's why there hasn't been a lot of effort, because it's going to be hard to shift that mindset. It's going to be hard to change that. And something we'll probably talk about, as this evolves, is there's obviously a problem between the minister and a senior civil servant within the Department of Education, and I think we're going to see stuff emerge on that as to why that has happened and what's going on there. And is that a minister who was trying to kick back against a civil servant who wasn't moving things forward, or was it what was going on there? So I think that's going to be an interesting story to follow, because I think it's going to feed in to what we've just been talking about over the last few minutes.
And then you get officials who just are actually, they're acting in good faith and they're trying to please, so they overpromise. So they promise the minister something will be sorted out in 3 months, and then the minister goes out and announces it, and then it isn't. E.g., the MOT centres, there were genuine problems there with lifts and COVID and everything. But each time the poor minister was being told, we'll get the backlog sorted in 2 months, and they go out and announce it, and of course then it's another 6 months or 9 months or it goes on. And that's just from maybe over-promising.
Yeah, and the capacities of governments to deliver around the world is something that's under severe question and strain at the minute. Okay, gents, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts and sharing some of your personal anecdotes from your time in the trenches as SPADs. We're going to move on now to our next topic, okay? And we're going to probably continue with the theme of dysfunction in some respects. We're going to move on and talk now about the Ulster Unionist Party, okay? Mike Nesbitt was speaking on the Give My Headpiece podcast episode, which was released just a couple of days ago, and he said that he is unsure if he will continue to lead the UUP into the next election. Now, Mike Nesbitt, of course, is currently our Minister for Health. He returned to the leadership last year following the sudden resignation of Doug Beattie. He has speculated that he might stand down before 2027. He told Tim McGarry and co on the podcast that in terms of the party and myself, I will probably make a decision no later than January coming about whether I should run again in 2027. So again, speculation about whether he even run as an MLA. He noted that I'll be 70, I'll have done 16 years, and that might be enough, but I'll make a decision in good time. This also comes this week as the UUP has a new recruit. So John Burrows, retired police officer. If you listen to many of our radio programmes on Radio Ulster, you will have heard John Burrows quite a lot. He is now the new MLA for North Antrim, replacing Colin Crawford. You may remember a couple of weeks ago we discussed the implications of the sudden departure of Colin Crawford. So I'm going to start off first with you, Tim, on this, okay? What on earth is going on with the UUP? I mean, UUP members must be bewildered by that. I don't know why Mike thought that was a sensible thing to say.
Yeah, you should never sometimes in politics say out loud what's in your head. And I think this is one of these occasions. I've given my Peace podcast has been amazing at drawing out these little tidbits. I think, people just feel a bit more relaxed. It's a couple of comedians, and, they feel then detached from like a Mark Carruthers or a William Crawley or a Stephen Nolan interview. So they feel they can talk a bit more. And it has been very revealing what some of the politicians, I think each politician who's been in, there's been something quite revealing has come out about them. I think, yes, Mike should not have said what he said. If that was in his head that he may not run and he wants to have succession planning for the election next year, that's something that he should have said in an executive meeting of the Ulster Unionist Party or in his group meeting to MLAs. Look, there's always going to be a problem with Mike being leader, right? Age. I mean, I know the President of the United States of America is whatever he is, 78, 79, but at the end of the day, when you're starting to approach 70 and going into an election, you really are at the back end of your political career. And there's no question we all knew Mike taking over leadership when he did from Doug Beattie. It was always going to be a problem because we knew Mike was going to be 70 going into this election. So this was either going to be Mike's last election and he'd be retiring and handing over shortly after the Assembly election, or he was going to have to retire before. Now, I think he's left things in even more doubt now. Because by saying I may retire, I may not retire, that's just really brought the Ulster Unionist problems back into stark focus again. Because who do they have to replace Mike? Because look, they didn't have anybody to replace Doug. Clearly, there's nobody within the party who wanted it. So Mike emerged as kind of a safe pair of hands. I think the feeling was he can lead us into the next election as a safe pair of hands, and therefore we can, start to
Well,
think after the
well,
election
you
and
see,
see who returns in the election to succeed him. But he's thrown that into turmoil.
yeah, you see, but this is the point, Michael. I'll come to you on this. Was Mike not meant to come back last year to take them to the election though? But this whole thing now it's like, oh well, maybe I won't. I mean, because remember there was a bit of debate at the time, Mike, if you remember last year, about could he do UUP leader and health minister at the same time, and there was considerable doubt raised about whether he could do both. Is that maybe what maybe has just crystallized for Mike? Is that look, I can't really do both positions here.
No, I think what has crystallised for Mike is just Mike. We sometimes call him media Mike. Mike goes off too early all the time. He's got form on this. He didn't he resign the leadership while they were still counting the votes?
They did on the Saturday,
in Stratford. Yeah. He jumped at that. He had in his head, without explaining it, without setting out a strategy, he addressed his own people with "Vote Mike, Get Column," which horrified a lot of his own party. He has these thoughts and he shares them. And even in the health ministry, he trotted around the park with Bengoa again, just for a wee bit of like a victory lap before he'd done anything. And he's doing it again with the announcement on the big initiative on waiting lists, and he's going to take 70,000 off the waiting list and so on. I would think he was just thinking out loud in his normal way, where he thinks in sound bites, and out came a sound bite, I mightn't be here, blah, blah, blah. Now, I think if the waiting list thing doesn't work, and by all accounts, he's put a very good guy in charge of it. But if it doesn't work and they don't build the teams and the capacity and the delivery, and that's no easy task, even to stop them increasing the waiting list. If he doesn't succeed there, I think that might help him with his decision in January. But it's Mike's form to say these things and do these things, and then probably regret it afterwards.
But does he, Tim? Does he make it to January though? Like, will the UUP just sit there and go? I suppose. I mean, I suppose they don't really have a choice, really, do they? Because you said who replaces him. Like that's the
Well,
thing. Yeah.
the only alternative at the moment, and we'll talk about John Burrows in a second, but the only alternative at the moment is Robbie Butler. And Robbie's had two, three, four occasions where he could have taken the leadership. He clearly doesn't want that. And it probably wouldn't be a good look for Robbie to take it, given a couple of years ago he pretty publicly wanted to get out of politics and move to be the children's commissioner, and missed out on that post, and then stayed in the UUP. So when Doug went, there was literally nobody to take over, and Mike was the only option. And I thought at the time it was a very clever appointment, because Mike's a safe pair of hands, or so I thought. And it seemed to me that, Mike's a good media performer, even though I take Michael's point that he talks in sound bites sometimes. But he is very
I
competent
thought
on the
that was very
media.
cruel for Michael, considering one of those sound bites helped the SDLP at least hold 4 seats at the 2017 Assembly election.
The crazy
Very
thing,
uncharitable.
you're right. The crazy thing about that was the "Vote Mike, Get Column." It sank into the mentality of some of the unionists who were then faced with a transfer decision.
Pat,
But the people in the room when he announced it didn't know what the heck he was talking about.
Pat Catney, Dolores Kelly all benefited from
Yeah,
it. But anyway,
yeah,
Tim, sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
So maybe Mike's been the greatest leader of the SDLP since John Hume. I don't know, but but certainly, it seemed like a safe pair of hands. But there's nobody. There's literally nobody who you could say is gonna potentially replace Mike. Although we've got John Burrows now coming along, and even today in the Belfast Telegraph, we're recording on Wednesday morning, and Suzanne Breen is declaring him to be potentially the next leader of the Ulster
Yeah.
Unionist Party, and he hasn't even signed into the
Well,
Assembly yet.
but this is the thing, because speaking of the current leader, Mike Nesbitt became an MLA in May of 2011. By 2012, he was the UUP leader. It was incredible rise up through the ranks of the party. For someone who had only, I think, went into elected politics in 2010 for the first time, but 2 years later, you're leading the party after Tom Elliott suddenly resigned. But Michael, I mean, is this, and we'll get on to their latest recruit next, but I mean, is this even salvageable for the UUP anymore? Because I'm looking at the polls, and you can just see that gap. I know we talk about the DUP TUV battle, but there's another battle going on within unionism, and that gap between the UUP and the TUV it's just evaporated. I mean, the TUV are now equaling the Ulster Unionist, not just in one poll, but in consistent polls. And even at the last Assembly election, on popular vote, on seats it was different, but on popular vote, there wasn't that much between the UUP and the TUV.
Yeah, well, as someone with an SDLP background, I've always drawn a degree of comfort from the situation of the Ulster Unionist Party and some of the little binds they get themselves into. You reach for every comfort that you can. Yes, they're in electoral bother, but there is a hardcore, maybe it's only 10%, but of the electorate that is Ulster Unionist that won't be DUP and won't be TUV. Can they grow that? There's huge competition, and unionism has, I guess, coalesced largely in recent years around the DUP, and will probably come back to the DUP, even though they've had a setback in recent times. And I'd expect the TUV to start going back down a bit as the DUP recovers its strength. I think the only question for the Ulster Unionist Party is, like, what is the difference between them and the modern Peter Robinson DUP or Gordon Lyons, Gavin Robinson DUP? Not a huge difference. At one point I thought maybe with Mike and maybe with Doug Beattie that there's a kind of liberal unionism breaking out, and it's distinctly different from DUP unionism, but I'm not sure that it is. And of course its background is the sort of big house unionism. So I don't think there's much of a role unless something happens to the DUP, and they've shown themselves to be pretty resilient given some of the forces impacting on them in recent times and the disappointment about the Northern Ireland Protocol and so on. I think the UUP are in a difficult place, but they've got 10%. If I was them, I would sort of get down on my knees and sort of beat a track down the road from me here towards Portadown and apologise to Doug Beattie and ask him, will he take over again? If Mike could
No,
do it,
I
Doug
don't
could
know.
do it.
I think the issue with the Nesbitt Beattie kind of experiments have been, yes, there is a wing within that party that is about liberal unionism, but I think the problem, Michael and Tim, if you want to give a comment on this, is that you can promote liberal unionism, but the problem is that you've got many people in the DUP who are more liberal than their Ulster Unionist counterparts in the same constituency. You look at someone like Gavin, you look at someone like Deborah Erskine or Dan Forsyth, you're kind of going, they're kind of, I'm sure they're the Paul Gibbons. I'm not saying the DP are a liberal party, but
Philip Brett.
but the Ulster Unionists have people who are way to the right of people in the DUP too. Isn't that the problem?
Sure, Tim could fit into the
Well,
modern Ulster Unionist Party.
I got described by our friend of the show, Jimmy Bryson, as a liberal unionist on Twitter just last week. So there you go. Look, for the Ulster Unionist Party, if they pivot to the left, they're fighting Alliance. And why would you vote for the Ulster Unionist Party when you can vote for Alliance? I think Alliance are the much more pure liberal party than what the Ulster Unionists are. And if you pivot to your right, you're going to have to fight the DUP and the TUV, and they're not going to win that fight either. The battle on unionism, as you quite rightly said, David, is between the TUV and the DUP at the next election. The DUP are not going to lose seats to the Ulster Unionist Party. The DUP are going to lose seats, if they lose any, to the TUV. And actually, and this probably brings us into North Antrim, the one place where the UUP are vulnerable, I think, with Robin Swan out of the election there, is in North Antrim. Because if Colin Crawford had have stayed on to be the Ulster Unionist candidate in 2027, as of today, if he had been the candidate, I would predict the TUV or the DUP were going to take that seat from the Ulster Unionist Party. Because look, the Ulster Unionist vote historically in that constituency has been around 8-9%, and Robin's been able to pull in at the very end and take the seat. Robin increased the Ulster Unionist vote to just shy of 20%. So between him and his running mate, they were just shy of 20% in the last election. Colin Crawford was not getting 20% of the vote. So John Burrows coming in seems to be a move to try and galvanise someone who's been a media performer over the last number of months and years that as someone that is recognisable, someone who's been overtly unionist in his commentary, who was a member of the party before and has rejoined the party. But I think we even talk about Mike Nesbitt and we talk about these people who come in from outside politics. I think there is a feeling from people who come in from outside politics that politics is easy, you know, that it's not a difficult thing to do. Tim Collins being a prime example of that. And if I was going to advise John Burrows, and if he was going to take any advice from me, I would say politics is nothing like being in the police. Doug Beattie, somebody needed to tell him politics is not like being in the army. Somebody needed to tell Steve Aiken it's not like commanding a submarine.
Yeah.
And people mistake, I was a leader in a submarine.
Yeah.
I was a leader of a troop that went through Basra or wherever and cleaned house. It is not the same thing. Being a leader in the police is not going to be the same as a leader in politics. And people don't get that. People just don't understand that how you operate in politics is a completely different game. It's like the difference between rugby league and rugby union. People move from rugby league to rugby union and think it's easy, but it's a different game. The way things happen, is different to how you expect them to happen. And that's the way it is in politics as well. So I would say to John, just sit back. Do not be listening to people in the newspaper saying you're going to be the next leader. Sit back, get the councillors on side in your constituency, in each of the district councils in your area. Work your councillors and build trust with them. Build trust that they are confident in you. Because at the end of the day, how he performs in the assembly election is going to then either benefit or to be the detriment of the district councillors. Get them on side, work with them, get their trust, and get the trust of people on the ground, and then start to think about, I can go on to the Nolan show and talk back, and I can start to promote myself as leader. That's a year. If I was him, I wouldn't even be thinking about that until 2027. I would immediately come out today and say, there's no way I'm going to be leader. I'm working the ground. I need to come in and build trust. And the people make the mistake that they can come in and immediately be leader, and they are wrong. And John Burrows, if he thinks that, is going to be wrong as well. Work the constituency and do what you can do.
And also get yourself a couple of issues that you become identified. If you can do stuff outside of policing, like not just be police, but other issues.
Absolutely, David. He's got to become an expert in something that is not just, and that's like fair play to John Burrows. The Belfast Telegraph is running a story about a Catholic police officer who said there was, institutional sectarianism in the PSNI. John Burrows, single-handedly, as an ordinary member of the public, is the person who completely dismantled that story that journalists had stood up. And we know journalists have to go through 2 or 3 sources and all of these things to stand them up in the paper. And he was the person who dismantled that story. And in the end, Sean, which was the name that the officer with the pseudonym he was going under, withdrew his story and wrote letters to all the politicians he spoke to. Say, you can't believe a word I said. I made it all up. That's an incredible piece of work that John Burrows has done as an ordinary member of the public. So let's sit back and see what he's going to do as a politician and with the might of a few staff behind him. But don't, as you say, David, don't concentrate on policing. Do what you've done in that Sean issue with something else.
Yeah, and Michael, what do you make of John Burrows? Because here's the other caveat, just to put in there, just because you're on Talkback in the Nolan show doesn't mean that many people in the public will also know who you are. You still need to. So, Michael,
present company accepted, of course.
Well, as me and David know, just because you're on Talkback doesn't mean anybody knows who you are. That is true.
But he's clearly a good media performer, and as a senior policeman, he's obviously got certain qualities of leadership and administrative skills and so on. But I agree, he would need to try and get a constituency operation underway and get to know the people of the constituency. Now, I would say he's not starting from that low base. I know there's a big personal Robin Swan vote there, but there is also an Ulster Unionist Party vote there. And it will, he will be starting with that core, and he'll have to add to it. As I look at that constituency, I think, the 5 seats, I think the Sinn Féin guy is a shoe-in. I think Tim Gaston is a shoe-in to TUV. 1 DUP, probably Paul Frew. Those 3 seats, I think, are baked in. And then the last 2 is a scrap between the 2nd DUP, John Burrows, and Alliance. And that's where the 2 final seats will go.
But I think John Burrows needs to be getting himself over 10% on first preference votes.
Yeah, because
you need 16% to get in, right? So
the TUV will be making a serious push to get that. It's going to be hard for the DUP because the DUP vote is still not recovered above the 21% that
Yeah.
Jeffrey
Well,
got
T,
in
will
2022. So it's
TUV
going to be
run
hard for
too
them to get
there?
that.
Will
Yeah,
TUV run too there?
they would be
Oh,
mad not
absolutely,
to.
certainly. DUP will
Mm.
run two, TUV will
They'll
run
run
two,
to.
Yeah.
and Ulster Unionists, if they've any sense, will just run one this time.
And
Yeah.
also, and the other problem that John is going to have is there are two non-unionist quotas now in North Antrim. Now,
That's right.
that doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah.
that Alliance are safe because those votes can
No.
fragment.
No.
That's what happened. That's how Alliance got in last time within Unionism. The vote fragmented a bit, so there's that risk too.
And
Sorry.
Mervyn's story missed out, but by very
400,
little.
400 votes.
Yeah.
400 votes.
Yeah.
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 So you've got all these issues as well. So just finally before we wrap this up, Michael, I'll give
Well,
you.
one thing we haven't mentioned, sorry, David, just to wrap up North Antrim, is what happens if Ian Paisley Jr. stands, and what will that do? And
we-
what do you think? What do you think? Will that what effect that have?
we
Does that just mean Paul Frew loses his seat, or does he have any
we
effect?
did well. Gavin is pretty non-committal. Look, to be honest, with you, I'm surprised the Deep North Antrim branch hasn't been brought into special measures yet. Just
Well,
because.
but just let's just say he is running. So let's just say
Oh yeah,
he's on the ballot
I think
paper.
he would be the favorite. He'd be the DUP one who would get the most first preps. Yeah, I think so.
And would that hurt the DUP's chances of getting to him running, or does that help their chances of getting to?
Paul Frew is cheapers. I don't know. You tell me. You're a Minnesota.
Well, no, you're our resident psophologist.
tell me.
I think it probably helps. It horrifies all the rest of us throughout the rest of Northern Ireland, but I think in North Antrim it probably helps.
Oh no, look, I think if he stood, he would get the most first preferences of the two DUP candidates. No question in my mind about that. Even though,
But does that help the DUP? Does that, if that's the ticket, should John Burrows be worried or happy?
No, I think
ticket?
John Burrows would be a bit happy, but I think the happier party would be the Alliance Party in that scenario. I think they would be the happier party in terms of that. They're just because a disgruntled DUP vote doesn't necessarily transfer over to the Ulster Unionists. It does have that other home, as you were saying, in the Alliance Party to go to. And Shan Mulholland, obviously, that'll be her first election up there too. So there'll be a lot of churn and change, but it remains to be. But we'll see whether Ian Paisley.
It'll be very hard for the DUP to balance the vote. If their DUP are going to win two, they need to balance it perfectly.
They do, and you see the problem, and the other problem that they may have is, and I think I'm right in saying this, but Paul Frew comes from the same part of North Antrim.
Both are Ballymena.
Yeah. So that'll be. But then he's moved someone a bit further up into other parts of the constituency. But anyway, all that lies ahead of us.
Well, just to say, the TUV are trying to balance the vote in that way because they've seen their second person will probably be from the Ballymoney end of the constituency.
Yeah, which makes complete sense, and that makes complete sense. And that'll be. And look, if the TUV can work that there, and look, Timothy Gaston, a year in, I think we said this, has shored up his position. He's done well, shored up his position. But we'll get into runners and riders and predictions toward May. Look at you trying to get me to call an election in July of 2025 that we're not going to hold until May of 2027.
Sure, you love getting your wee spreadsheets out and running down the figures.
I do indeed. Anyway, gents, thanks so much for going around the house with me. Just a reminder, we do have two sister podcasts. So the Holyrood Sources podcast takes you inside Scottish politics. We have Whitehall Sources, which takes you inside politics at Westminster. Make sure you give them a listen. Available wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to get in touch with us. Comment on anything you've heard on the show today. 0333 404 6507. Just remember to use the word Stormont. Also send us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. That's all we have time for this edition of Stormont Sources. Thank you for listening. Please keep in touch with your ideas, questions and comments. That's all from Tim, Michael and myself. We'll see you next week.